So I'm Nikki Coppa, if you don't know me. I've been a broker down here in San Diego for, well, gosh, since 1999. I like to say since last century. Um, and I'm a forms nerd. So when we look at all the revisions and additions, there were 10 forms that were added to the library because they went, hey, we don't have enough. We need more. They're actually very, very helpful, but not all of them are going to be reviewed today. One of the things I'm going to leave out in my review is anything to do with leasing. Okay, so leasing, if you do leasing, you do want to go ahead and check out the red lines. I'll tell you that the CAR legal review of the new forms that they have recorded on the website, they didn't go over the leasing forms either. I'm going over the transactional stuff, and I'm doing the stuff that you see every day. And most importantly, we have a change to practice that I want you to understand. So when we look at form revisions and additions, look at all of these. I actually had to change my slides to incorporate 3 different columns. And I'm like, I am not writing the true title of all of these on here. But I do want you to have this, okay? There is one on there, the MLSA. That actually had been revised, but it's being held back. That's the multiple listing service addendum that bundles with your residential listing agreement. Okay, so you will likely see a new version of the MLSA that releases before the December release. Typically, CAR will only release twice a year, once at the end of June or early July, depending on where the deadlines hit. So once then, and then once right before Christmas. It's Nerd Christmas. Usually it's in the first or second week of December. So this is the list of all of them, and I give them to you just so that you can see them and you can look them all up if you want to. We are not going over every single one today because I can't drink that much caffeine. So here is the list of new forms, and there are several of them. I'm not going to go over the ones that are leasing related, but there are some new ones that I will go over, not in depth. I'm not going to read every word to you, but I want to show them to you because I do believe that they'll be used in most transactions. All right, so the big thing that's coming about right now is, oh, that's right, I can't walk. We have a change to practice. So as you know, there was this little, this little lawsuit. There was some discussion about that, right? And then there was a settlement agreement. And then we all had to change the way we did business. And there was a lot, we've changed a lot. The first release of the forms, the big thing that we saw was that California, CAR, decided that it was best to remove any and all references to cooperating compensation in our forms, okay? Now, that's not exactly what the lawsuit said, but it is what we saw in the inferences coming from the Department of Justice when they had opined on some different lawsuits, the No Select lawsuit in particular. They specifically said that the settlement agreement was not enough, that they wanted a decoupling of compensation. So that being said, CAR always tries to kind of lead the way. And they said, if this is what the DOJ is saying publicly, how do we not know that we're going to get there eventually? So let's skate to where the puck's going to be, not where it is. And so that's why that was removed. So then there was that whole, okay, so remember the SPBB, seller payment to buyer's broker? That was the magic form, okay? If we wanted the buyer wanted the seller to pay their buyer's agent compensation, we put in the SPBB, right? And it said you can ask for a copy to verify. And then they went, okay, wait, nobody can figure out how to counter the SPBB in practice. So they pulled that out, and they said, instead of that, we're just going to put in a buyer affirmation. The buyer's going to say, I swear that my buyer rep agreement is not written for less than what I've asked for. And then in practice, you know what we said? Buyer didn't read that. Okay, this buyer affirmation means nothing. The buyer is not reading that. So it's useless. What we saw in the field is we saw lawsuits. Okay, one of the ones that first came out, an example of one, is the listing agent was sued by the seller because
the compensation that let's say that the seller paid 100 bananas, okay? And again, not because we are doing antitrust here, I'm going to have random crazy things that I say. 100 bananas they paid, okay? Then the seller said, I don't think that agreement was written for 100 bananas. And the settlement agreement states that buyer's agent can't collect more than what the buyer rep agreement is written for. Therefore, I'm going to file a complaint. DRE holds the, asked for a copy of the file and saw that buyer rep agreement was only written for 50 bananas. So the seller sued the listing agent, stating it was your job to verify that, okay? Now that lawsuit's still out there, and it's not gonna be, anytime a lawsuit is filed, it takes forever for them to settle out, and we never want them to. Because if the court actually decides something, it is rarely in our favor, guys. So usually brokerages will go in and settle these things out so that the court does not make a decision that then becomes precedent. So with that out there, then we started looking at this. And if you read the settlement agreement, and this is CAR Legal's interpretation and my interpretation of their interpretation, okay? It's not our job as a listing agent to verify that. Because what does our code of ethics say? And what does business and professions code say? It says that we can't interfere with an exclusive contract of another. So as the listing agent, do I have the right to say, Mike, I need to see your buyer rep agreement? And it's not written for this much. Therefore, okay, I'm not a party to the purchase agreement as an agent, right? So I'm interfering in that contract. I'm interfering in Mike's contract. Sorry, Mike, you sat up front. You know it's going to be you the whole time. So with all of that, CAR Legal went, okay, you know what? We need to take a position. Went to the DRE, said, DRE, what's your position on this? They said, you know what? The new law just went into effect in January, and we will include this in our regulations in November. Well, beautiful. What does that mean until then? Brokers out there said, hey, we want a decision. What do we do? Is the listing agent responsible or not? Okay? Now, what CAR often does is we attempt to persuade people to see our point of view. Okay? And should it be the listing agent's job to police what the buyer's agent does? No, it shouldn't be. Okay? We don't want that. That is not going to cause anything good to come in our world. So the changes that have been done, there are changes in the RPA, the purchase agreement, there are changes in the listing agreement, and there are changes in the buyer rep agreement. All of those changes to language are subtle, but they all come back to that same thing. That look, if the buyer asks the seller to pay any of their agent's compensation, that is an agreement about a number, and it is not tied to a form. Broker will not verify. Broker will not get involved, okay? Now, what is happening on the other end is from the buyer's agent perspective, okay, if I'm the buyer's broker and my agent collects more than what that's written for, DRE is going to cite us. There will be discipline. And we'll see what that discipline is when the new regs come out in November, okay? But I'm sure it's not going to be small. The other part of that is, remember, all of us as members of NAR, we're covered under the settlement. The jury verdict came back for, I think it was $5.8 billion. Do any of you have $5.8 billion? I know I don't, okay? The settlement agreement was for millions of dollars, and that is being paid out. We are all protected, and we don't have to pay the billions because we're under the settlement agreement if we comply with the terms of the settlement agreement. So if I write a buyer's rep agreement for 1 banana, okay, and then I collect 3 bananas, I have not complied with the terms of the settlement agreement. I could be pulled out of those protections and then be liable for that $5.8 billion, okay? Now, where is all this policing going to come from? I don't know, but why should we be the police? That is what we are looking at. the end of the day, it's going to fall on the brokerage themselves, who does have supervisory responsibility to make sure that these are right, okay? So I know that was a lot of context, but then now the rest of this will kind of make sense. So the changes that were made in your broker compensation advisory, okay, you're gonna see the requirement for written agreements, okay? It says that you must have a buyer rep agreement, and it talks about when compensation is due, okay? So again, we've got in the broker's compensation advisory, the buyer's broker is not permitted to receive compensation for services from whatever source that is greater than the amount in the buyer rep agreement. Okay? One of the things that I'm seeing as we've slowed down, as the sales and the closings have slowed down a little bit, I'm seeing more and more incentives out there. Okay? Guess what? Gone are the days where as the buyer's agent, you get the incentive. The incentive is going to go to the buyer, which is probably where it should have been, right? Because I can't accept anything more. You can't offer me a trip to Hawaii if I close by whatever, okay? Because my buyer rep agreement isn't written for 3 bananas and a trip to Hawaii. So I can't collect that trip to Hawaii. So those incentives, as you're looking at them, can be offered to the buyer, which is why our RPA is laid out the way it is. So these are the changes, those are the changes to the BCA. The residential listing agreement, the big changes that are in there, seller concessions, you can see, should seller agree to pay any of the buyer's agent compensation? Broker does not represent, nor will broker confirm that the amount specified is owed by buyer to buyer's broker pursuant to a written agreement that covers the seller's property. That says, I'm not checking the buyer rep agreement, okay? So, we don't get to ask for it anymore, okay? That's going to be probably the biggest thing in practice. I'm hearing in different areas. So for my particular company, I cover San Diego County, Riverside County, Orange County. One of the first things out of anyone's mouth in Riverside County, if it's a TC, give me your buyer rep agreement. And I'm like, okay, here's what you're going to send back to them, because that's not happening. It's not their business. It's not their job. So you're going to need to look at that when you're talking to your agents. Okay? Seller's advisory. We haven't changed that little bad boy in a while, so they actually added something in here as well. So it goes in that same language. Broker is not going to confirm that the buyer rep agreement is written for that much or more than what they asked for in the RPA. It is an independent credit. And if we think about it, okay, when I wrote my RPA for my buyer, I said buyer asks for a $10,000 credit towards closing costs. Okay? Did the seller say prove the $10,000? I want to see where those $10,000 are going. No, they just went okay, 10 grand. They were agreeing to a credit because they're working off a net, right? That's really where we need. That's how you need to view the buyer broker compensation. Is it's a number, okay? It's not anything we're going to confirm one way or another. If that number doesn't agree with what your net is, Mr. Seller, then you counter either that number or price or another term to get to your desired net, okay? So the way that it's laid out now in the purchase agreement, here are the big ones. This is paragraph 3 because it's the grid. 3G1, it's the plain seller credit to buyer. Okay, check the box, put in the amount. Credit for closing costs. Now, is buyer agent compensation a closing cost? Yeah, it is. Okay, so we could put that whole amount in 3G1 if we wanted to. That's not a problem at all. The reason why we have it separated out is because if my buyer has a loan, okay, which most buyers do, then I call the lender and I say, is there a limit? What is the limit on credits that they can get on their loan? And they say, Nikki, that limit is $15,000 for their loan. I say, okay, well, buyer's agent compensation doesn't count towards that cap. So if I have a $15,000 cap on the loan, okay, then I could put $15,000 here in 3G1, but I can't go any more than that. I would have to put anything else in the 3G3. I point this out because that's the only reason why they're separated. Otherwise, it is the same thing. It is a buyer's cost. If we need to do that because of the limits on credits, then you can use 3G3. The other thing that was a concern out there is that if, let's say that my buyer rep agreement was written for 10 bananas, and we just write in seller credit to buyer 10 bananas, that the seller might go, well, that's a lot of bananas. What are they using these bananas for, okay? And so then we could explain with 3G3, well, I'm asking for 10 bananas and it's all going towards my agent compensation. So these are tools for you, but they can both, you can't say that it's for broker compensation if it's not, but at the end of the day, it is a closing cost. So what is 3G2 all about? Okay, additional seller credit terms. What is this? Here are your incentives. Okay, so it says in the MLS, seller willing to pay 1 year of HOA. That's where we write this in because we don't want it to go against the credit cap, right? We don't want it to be a credit. We want them to prepay 1 year of HOA. So it's a contractual agreement, but it wouldn't be something that my buyer now has a cap on. So I'm going to put that there. This is also a great thing for solar, okay? Solar is the ultimate nightmare for agents right now. There are usually up to 3 different agreements for solar, something for the cost of the equipment, something for the maintenance and warranty of the equipment, and something for the purchase of power. Most buyers seem to think that when they buy something with solar, the sun just makes the power happen. No, there is a power purchase agreement, and they have to assume that. Well, there's transfer fees for everything these days. So if there are 3 different agreements, there might be 3 different transfer fees. And maybe those transfer fees, because they're getting up there, they're no longer $100. They're about $500. Well, now this is $1,500 more. I don't want this falling on my buyer, right? So when I write this, and I know it has solar, I might write in here additional seller credit terms, seller to pay transfer fees for any and all solar contracts, okay? So that may be something that I put in there, especially right now where buyers are getting a little more leverage, okay? You have an HOA. HOAs right now, there's a lot of special assessments because we've got that new balcony law that nobody can figure out, okay? And we've got insurance issues. Those master policies are crazy expensive. So a lot of HOAs right now have special assessments that are pending. So if I was putting a buyer into a condo, I may also say, okay, I want seller to pay for any pending special assessments, okay? That way I can get that out there right there. So those are your incentives. So 3G1 is your quick and dirty, $10,000 towards closing costs. My buyer will use it for whatever. Okay? 3G2, these are your incentives or any special circumstances that you want paid off. You want to keep it out of the whole loan picture. I want this paid towards that balance. And then 3G3 is when we're specifically talking about compensation. And you can see there's no more buyer affirmation, right? Buyer's not swearing to anything. This is just, Mr. Seller, you are agreeing to a credit, okay? So that credit is X% or 5 bananas. And that's the way we want to treat it, okay? All right, so when we look at that, the other things that you want to look at too is there has been a change to the law for home fire hardening and defensible space. And I'm going to go into that when I actually show the form. But part of that is they changed the language in the RPA to reflect the new requirements. Okay? The other thing in the RPA that changed are broker compensation because once again, we're trying to set the tone, right? At the end of the day, listing agent is not responsible for and will not confirm anything in the BRBC. So that's what the other changes were. So in our buyer rep agreement, a couple different things. First of all, we expected the language to change to from 3 months to 90 days. The new law, AB 2992, that states the buyer rep agreement you must have a buyer rep agreement, right? And it cannot exceed 3 months. Well, nobody can figure out what 3 months is. And so we said, CAR said, okay, look, could we say 90 days? Because that seems to make more sense counting them out calendar days. So what I understand is that the legislature said that when they write this up as the new law with some of the details, that they will say 90 days. But it still hasn't happened. So the way the law reads is still 3 months. So remember, if you write any buyer rep agreement for more than 3 months, okay, what does it say? This agreement is void. Which means, how much can you collect as a buyer's agent? Zero. You are working for free. Then we go into amount of compensation. Okay, this is where the change went here. You're going to look at 4G3. See the red. Under a settlement agreement binding on all realtors, broker is prohibited from receiving compensation in excess of the amount in this agreement. Buyers advised not to include in a purchase offer a request that seller pay an amount higher than the amount in paragraph 2E1, which we know the buyer reads everything in this buyer rep agreement, right? But it's right there. So here's the thing. That whole settlement, you got to remember, these attorneys went after this lawsuit for over 30 years. They pursued this lawsuit. They got a judgment for $5.8 billion. Then they settled for a lot less. Okay? Catchmark has been out publicly stating that he is looking for people that are violating the terms of their settlement agreement, and they will be pulled out and held responsible. So, again, just understand what the rules are. All right, so that was practice changes to the big three. 39 minutes in, doing good. All right, so now we have some changes to addendums, and to amendments. If you've been around for a while, this was our catch-all form, the ADM, right? Anything we wanted to do, there were blank lines, and I could just write what I wanted in there. And every broker in the room, you have nightmares about this form. You're like, could we just delete it altogether? Please don't let people write language, okay? So what they did with this, and a change came about a few years ago, and they created something called an amendment to existing agreement. That's Form AEA. It was created because these addendums had no expiration date on them. So what we found is, as the buyer's agent, I would write up, buyer wants blah, 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 blah. We'd send it to the seller side. Seller's like, I'm not signing that. So we had this open offer throughout the entire transaction because there was no expiration date on it, right? Seller could technically sign it at any point in time, and now we have a different agreement. So one of the things that you may have noticed are our request for repairs, our seller's response to request for repairs, our counter offers, our offers. Everything has an expiration date on it. That way, if it hasn't been signed after those 3 days, it's dead. That offer is no longer binding and valid, okay? Because that way, you're not having something signed and changed at the end of your transaction. So with the ADM, what they've changed is they've put in notes on how to use it. Form use notes. This form is intended to be used in a buyer-seller or tenant-housing provider transaction. For all other situations requiring an addendum, use an addendum generic, okay? That's a new form, ADM-GEN, okay? So that's your generic one. So this is only for buyer-seller, tenant and housing provider, okay? Then we look at the bullets. A change or addition to a previously provided SPQ or TDS, this is our subsequent disclosure, right? If we're looking at that, or other disclosure may be made on a, what? Amendment to prior disclosure. That's another new form, APD. Amendment to prior disclosure, okay? So, two of our new forms, now no mystery, they're right there, okay? And then to say to change the terms of an already executed agreement, use the amendment to existing agreement. So if I have an RPA and there's a change, buyer and seller have agreed to something, I'm using the AEA, okay? Not the ADM. What they're trying to do is get more and more things away from this addendum. Addendum is supposed to be a clarification or maybe adding something, not changing something, okay? When we look at it in addendum, it's very easy to say that doesn't need to go to the lender. Well, it does need to go to the lender, and it does need to go to escrow if it is incorporated into the RPA. So when we look at it, we want to make sure that we're trying to teach people the right way. If you're changing a material term in your contract, you want to use the AEA. So here are the instructions, okay? So that's what your addendum is. Now your addendum generic, okay? This puts out that this could be between a broker, an agent, a buyer, a tenant, okay? Principal one, and maybe a housing provider, or a broker, agent, seller, housing provider, okay? So if I were amending the terms of my agent's ICA, okay, I could use it that way, right? This is not for buyer, seller, this is not for tenant, landlord. I'm sorry, housing provider is just too hard to say. So tenant, landlord. Ooh, look at that, landlord, they put the word. Ha, I gotta tell them, we don't use the word anymore. So anyway, and then it says further, if the principals intend to modify the compensation previously agreed to in a listing or buyer representation agreement, you use the modification of terms for that agreement. We have a modification of terms for the listing agreement. We have a modification of terms for the buyer rep agreement. Okay, once again, this is just trying to get everybody to understand that when we are actually modifying a contract, we want to say that is a modification of those terms. Okay, it's not an addendum. I'm going to add something, but it's not a real change. Okay, that's not a thing. That's not what the courts see it as. So, your amendment to prior disclosure. So, for a while, if you've been around for a while, you know the ADM used to have a checkbox that said, you could check the box and say this is an amendment or an addendum to the TDS. Okay? Then it said something about that 5-day right of rescission, but it was kind of vague. Okay? Amendment to prior disclosure. This form is created very specifically for these things. So, it could be that the agent now found out something that they need to add to their AVID. Okay? Maybe that's what they're doing. Or some subsequent thing has happened. It's 3 days before a close of escrow and somebody breaks into the property. They broke a window, there was a little bit of damage, seller's going to take care of everything, but you do have to tell the other side. This is a material fact that must be disclosed. It's a subsequent disclosure under our contract. So we're saying this is an amendment to either the SPQ or the TDS, whichever one has the question about has there been crime on and has a window been broken, right? Because we're going to amend those. Okay, so buyer, seller, blah, blah, blah. There is a thing if there is a triplex or duplex, which unit was affected. Then we go into, at the very, very bottom, seller makes the following disclosures. It's applicable to paragraph whatever. So if this is something that it says neighborhood disturbances, and that's paragraph 16 of the SPQ, and I now say there's been break-in, okay, then I'd say this is modifying my answer to that because I said no, and now it's yes, right? Okay, so they can put all this in. Now, look at what this says, disclosure limitation. The following are representations by the seller and are not representations of the agent. This disclosure statement is not a warranty of any kind and is not a substitute for any inspections or warranties for the principal may wish to obtain. Okay? This disclosure is not intended to be part of the contract between buyer and seller. This is important because what does that mean? It doesn't have to go to the lender. This is not part of the contract. It's a subsequent disclosure to the TDS and SPQ, which are not sent to the lender. Okay, so it's important to have that in there. Unless otherwise specified in writing, broker and any real estate licensee or other person working through the broker have not verified information provided by the seller. Okay, because we don't know. This is the seller making the disclosure. Okay, one of the big things that we have to remember is that in practice, what we typically do, I'm the listing agent, this happened, right? I call Mike and I say, Mike, okay, bad news and good news. So somebody broke in, they broke a window, we already have the window fixed. In fact, it's a better window than what was there before, okay? That's already been fixed. filed a police report. And there was a little graffiti on the wall, so we painted the whole downstairs so we can still close. And Mike says, okay, and we all move forward. We can't do that. You must make, the seller must make this disclosure to the buyer, okay? Because in any communication between the two of us, none of that counts. We're not parties to the contract. It's the law. So that's why this was created, to give us a little bit more of any discussions between agents don't count. This is what counts, okay? So that's why that was brought in there. Buyers, the importance of investigation. I will always call this the Buyer's Inspection Advisory. It's what it was once upon a time. It's kind of like the Del Mar Fair. It's always going to be the Del Mar Fair to me. It's not San Diego County Fair, okay? But it is the Buyer's Investigation Advisory. And the reason for that is because it's not just inspections. It's also reports. It's availability of insurance, all of those things. So this is something that it was 4 years, and they went, how can we beef this up a little bit? What are we seeing? What's different? And when they look at this, they also look at what lawsuits are out there. So importance of property investigation. Basically, we found more language that said, buyer, do your due diligence. It's not your broker's responsibility to do any of these things. And if they recommend professionals, they do not warranty their service, okay? But that being said, legal will always say, recommend 3, let them choose themselves, okay? But more language for that. But they also put in sewer and internet, utilities, sewer and internet. So some specific areas, we have areas throughout the state where you are limited in what you can do for your limited, or for your internet, for your utilities, and there's sewer issues. So that's one of your new paragraphs. And then the ever popular solar power system, okay? This says you do not just magically get power. There are a lot of things involved in this, and you must investigate everything. All right, buyer investigation of election, buyer investigation elections. Okay, they made a couple changes here where it's your affirmative duty to go through all of this. You must do your due diligence, buyer. Once again, we're telling them this. Why is that we say that so many times in every single form? Because buyers are the one that sue. And you know what the buyers say? I didn't know. Okay, so I'm telling you again, it is your job. But it is also our job to point out that, once again, it says it is your job to do all the inspections. You didn't know what kind of inspections you could have? Well, let me tell you, okay? Here is a menu. And so you put this in front of this. What they did is they changed it around to make the most popular inspections, the ones that are done most often, are the top 3 now. General home inspection, insurability, and wood destroying pest. Okay, so those are the top 3. Now, one of the things that we see, sewer is becoming more and more of an issue down here. And do you know, in other parts of the state, they have a point of sale requirement of the inspection of sewer lateral before they can close. So when we look at those kinds of things, when we know that other parts of the state are doing something, we know that it could creep down to our world. So we want to make sure people are aware. And if they're aware that they can do an inspection and don't, then okay, sirrah, right? But we want to make sure that they know that it's on there. So 42 different inspections. Woohoo! Never getting out of escrow. Okay, buyer's inspection waiver. This was, once again, just a review. They added in other inspection reports. One of the things that I want to point out here is that when a buyer has their general inspection, okay, I did a little sample on my files. I pulled 5 files and I pulled 5 different property inspections. And I counted how many times it said you should hire the appropriate professional. Average was 10 to 14 times. Okay, how many more inspections do your buyers get? Maybe 1. Yeah. Okay, well, there's 14 recommendations. And what happens with that is the buyer then finds out that the fireplace, who knew? That was a death trap, okay? They now are suing, saying, my buyer's agent should have told me that that was a death trap, okay? And we say, but wait a minute, it says on your physical inspection report that this looks like a death trap, and you might want to have this investigated by the appropriate professional. And then what they say in court is, yeah, but they said that to 13 other times. My agent didn't tell me it was important. Okay, how do I prove I told them this was important? Well, the buyer inspection waiver has a way of doing that. This is waivers of additional investigations recommended by other reports. So this should be, I mean, technically in every file, because this is golden. If it says buyer has received a general home inspection report prepared by ABC Inspections dated on January 15th. Broker recommends that buyer obtain those additional investigations. In bold, if you do not do so, you are acting against the advice of brokers. Okay? Buyer, go ahead and initial right here that you have decided not to obtain any of those. That's how I can prove that I had that conversation. Okay? And that's the best way to try and get out of being sued. Okay? All right, big change to the FHDS. I know you're like, okay, is it easier? No, it's not. Okay? In fact, we've just added to the chaos. That is because we now have 12 awesome new questions that sellers will not know how to answer, okay? They already can't answer the 6 that are on there. They go, I don't know, right? So, you know, our legislators went, ooh, let's put on some more things. Well, I'm going to tell you the reason behind it. The reason behind it is because insurance is a problem in the state of California. Nobody wants to write here because of the liability risk, right? It costs way too much because of our wildfires. Well, all of that being said, how do you solve this problem, okay? Really, the way we're going to solve that problem is by mitigating the risk on the homes that exist. We're not as a state going to wipe everything out and build better homes, right? But the ones that are there can be hardened so that the whole neighborhood doesn't go up. So what they need to do, and everybody knows that we need to get homeowners to understand the value added to their home if in fact they do fire hardening upgrades. So now there's a list of 12 of them that will appear in this statutory disclosure. List of low-cost retrofits, okay? You know that low-cost roof? I know, everybody's like, that is not low cost. But think about it, the home costs $1 million, okay? So a $35,000 roof is pretty low cost if you're defending $1 million home, right? So anyway, they're all on here, okay? So here are 5 of them, okay? And then here are the rest of them, the other 7. There are 12 of them. You might want to read through them just so that when your seller goes, what? Okay? Literally, if they haven't done anything in the last 10 years, probably none of these apply. Okay? All of your fire hardening stuff went into effect from the building industry on January 1, 2010. Okay? So they did something after that. Okay, then they may have a Class A roof. But when they read this and they say, roof replaced with Class A fire-rated roof. Well, it doesn't leak, so I give it an A. That's a yes, right? Okay, no. When in doubt, if you don't know that that's what it is, the answer is no. That's really what we want to always say with our client. If you do not know, the answer is no. Okay? So, 12 more questions. It will just be more confusing, but it is what it is. This is where we are. And we need to help educate our clients. Take some time. Go on the Ready for Wildfire website, readyforwildfire.org, okay? They talk about all of these things. Because the idea, think about energy efficiency. If you're old like me, once upon a time we didn't care about the energy efficiency of any building, okay? Now they're LEED, or they're HERD, or they've got some kind of neat little designation, and that gives that property more value, right? They want that same thing to happen, and it should happen, really, with fire hardening, okay? At the end of the day, there are homes that went through the fires in Pasadena, the Eaton fire. There were 3 homes that did not burn down. They were hardened, okay? And so when you look at that, wow, this is what we could do. Is it a low-cost retrofit to spend $100,000 on your $2 million home? Yes, it is, okay? So, again, read through it. That's my little plug for the day. The state will thank me. All right, possible representation of multiple buyers or sellers, okay? You should read this because it's in every single one of our contracts, right? It goes in front of every buyer, it goes in front of every seller, okay? In the state of California, we can always represent multiple buyers, multiple sellers. But once upon a time, there was a lawsuit from a buyer that said, you never told me, okay? Well, we didn't have a responsibility. There was no law that said I had to tell you. But if people are going to sue us, then okay, we're going to make this form and we're going to tell you. So in this form, I'm going to tell you that as the listing agent, I can represent multiple sellers, I can represent multiple buyers, okay? And some of those may actually result in dual agency. Now, they made a significant change to the form, okay? So when we look at that, I've got, all right, so broker relationship. We can have a lot of different kinds of relationships. I can represent multiple buyers, I can represent multiple sellers. And that could result in dual agency in a transaction. Brokerage dual agency and single agent dual agency? What? That's not a thing in California, okay? Right now, California only refers to dual agency being with the same broker, okay? For years, they have tried to get through legislation that would outlaw dual agency in the state. There are many states throughout the union that allow for same brokerage agency, but they don't allow for a single agent dual agency, okay? So, one of the things that we have to do is if the legislators had their way, we would not have dual agency. That means that would basically kill all of our large brokerages, okay? Because if you worked for a large brokerage, that means there were a whole bunch of people that you can't work with, right? So one of the things that CAR always does is they look to see what's on the horizon and try to find an acceptable alternative, okay? Do people really have problems with dual agency if it's two different agents? No. What they typically will sue on is when it's the same agent. She liked him better than she liked me, okay? That's where the lawsuits come in. So if we ever go down that road, and to help make sure that you understand, it could be a single agent dual agency, it could be a brokerage dual agency. There are two different kinds, and you, Mr. Buyer, Mr. Seller, have the right to understand, and you must consent to that. So we've said this up front. You can't later on say, well, I didn't know that the same agent was representing both sides. We said this, then we did our confirmation, which is required under California law, in our contract, right? Paragraph 2, that is confirmation of agency. So you consented. But you're also going to see, look at the title. So this is disclosure and consent, okay? This is just that other step that the Department of Real Estate, it was about 4 years ago that they issued a bulletin stating that although we explain dual agency to somebody when we first establish our agency, we don't really prove that we explain what that means once we go into contract. Well, how do we prove that? There's a video of me talking to them, right? Okay, we're not doing that. Well, this is just another step that we say, okay, that confirmation will be done in the RPA. All right. So when we look at that, the other things that they changed a little bit of your language, those people that say, my offer is confidential, it's a big secret, you can't tell anyone. No, it's not. And this is the form that says this. Offers are not confidential unless you've signed a confidentiality agreement. Okay? As the listing agent, Mike asks me, what is your highest offer written for? Okay? If it behooves my seller, I can tell him. Okay? If it does not behoove my seller, my fiduciary duty says don't tell him. I can't lie, but I can respond. And I can tell him, well, it's 10 grand over list. Bring me a good one, right? I can do that as long as it's the truth. okay? And then it goes through, again, the same stuff that we had before. But that's an important thing, because somebody, you know, the engineers out there, they're gonna read that, and they're gonna be like, it's going to be more about the single agent, dual agency. So read it just so that you know how you're gonna speak to it. Notice to seller to perform. These are quick and dirty additions. Let's see, yeah, we're gonna get through this. On the notice to seller to perform that nobody ever serves, what do we do as a buyer's agent? We just beg for things. We go, please, please, will you send me the solar? Please, please, will you send me the WBSA? Okay, well, now they're on the notice to perform. And it's an important dynamic because most solar suits right now, all of the complaints that are out there, the claims, are about the agents not pushing to get the information that the buyer and that the seller was responsible for and that the buyer was entitled to. So what does this do? It puts them on record. I pushed, I did my job. I can't make anyone do anything. We asked for it. The other thing too is the WBSA. Okay, this is a nightmare. More California legislation that I absolutely adore. They didn't say who could do these inspections. You've got HOAs right now refusing to give the reports because, well, that condo is not involved. Well, it doesn't matter. Guess what? The special assessment is going to go to all homeowners. So it's a material fact. The legislation is being cleaned up and it will be more defined for HOAs. CAR has sponsored a couple different amendments that are saying, okay, we need to let HOAs know this stuff. But in the meantime, the WBSA, that's the wooden balconies and stairs addendum, that is that new law that if you have a building with 3 or more units, okay, so single family home, out, okay, condo, it is a building, unit 1, unit 2, unit 3 are all attached, okay, that's in. Now, does it have a balcony? Yes, it does. Okay, WBSA applies. Does it have a balcony? No, but it has wooden stairs. Okay, it applies. Okay, so if it applies, the WBSA must be served to the other side. The other side says, hey, buyer, you have the right to this inspection, blah, blah, blah. And it also says at the very end, last sentence, you must comply with its terms. So it also says you must give the buyer that copy of that inspection. What I will tell you in practice, if you list a home, okay, in a condo complex right now, and you call that HOA and say, I need that report, they're going to tell you to pound sand. And they can tell you that because they have no obligation to you. They have an obligation to the homeowner. The homeowner is going to sign a contract that obligates him to give a copy of that report to the other side. And if that seller breaches that contract, then the seller could have damages, right? So that owner is a part of the homeowners association. Owner needs to call. Owner needs to call, owner needs to push, okay? Most of the time, if you push hard enough, you can get the report, but it has taken weeks with some of them. Until the legislation goes through, do this early. Do it as soon as you list the home, have your seller make sure that they are calling. And then last one, which I have never seen this be an issue, removal of the substitution of eligibility for VA loan. That's why nobody uses this form, because there's things that we just don't use. Seller contingency removal, okay, all they added is substitution of eligibility for VA loan, okay? Yes, assumptions are happening. Do they happen very often? Okay, but it's there. Referral fee agreement, they just changed the way it looks. Basically, how many of you have written this backwards? Where you're like, am I the referring agent or am I the recipient agent? Okay, we now have, okay, the referring broker is the broker getting paid for referring a client. So they put it in parentheses so that it's not backwards. As a broker, I will tell you at least once a month, I have to send one back and go, okay, switch the parties. You didn't do it the right way. So that is a little bit more clear. And then blah, 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 blah. There was a big question on if I was the listing agent and I took a listing for 5 bananas and then I said I need an additional 1 banana if the buyer is unrepresented. And then there was a referral fee agreement on it. Does the referring party get a part of that additional 1 banana? Okay, so they wanted clarification. And so the clarification is that total gross compensation earned. So yes, if I can't remember how many bananas, it's all the bananas, okay? And that's a percentage of it. And then referral period, 12 months is the default, and you can put less than that. Right now, it has a checkbox and a blank. I just received one last night that said forever. I went to go to Wisconsin because apparently this is what we write contracts for. I'm like, okay, we can't do that. It has to be a defined period. So, yay, there's no more forever option. And then for office use only, we often see our agents that are, they have an agreement to split compensation. Really what we should be using is the agent compensation sharing addendum, okay? Because compensation is earned by the broker and then it's doled out, right? So referral fee agreements, oftentimes agents will do them and go, can you sign this? I'm like, okay, it's all my money. You're just saying how to split this. It's a different kind of agreement, but because so many of them use this, look, we can have the agent initial as well, and then you can do it internally. All right, so receipt for reports, okay? So the only changes here were that the reports provided to the buyer, and then they put in there, seller is not aware of any other reports in seller's possession or control, okay? This is important because we're getting a lot of lawsuits. Buyer sues, says, hey, I had a plumbing issue. Plumber came out and they said, yeah, I just did this for the Johnsons a year ago and told them that the plumbing was shot. Good. Okay. Well, if that report was given to the Johnsons and the Johnsons knew that, then the Johnsons had the obligation to turn that knowledge over to that buyer. Okay, so that would be failure to disclose. Most likely the Johnsons will be writing a check. Okay, so they're just trying to clarify this a little bit more. This is the one that you use to do your broker disclosure. So as the broker, it's my responsibility to retain copies of files for at least 3 years under DRE regs. Okay, if we sold that property, okay, we were part of that property sale in the last 3 years, and I have that file still, even if it was 50 years ago and I have the file, as the broker, I have to give copies of any material documents over to the other side. Well, that's interesting. Okay, what's material? That's why the broker has to pull that, not the agent. Agents never make that decision. The broker makes that decision. When the broker puts that package together, then we use this form, receipt for reports, and we say, here's everything, okay? Because it's basically everything we've seen a lawsuit on. So that's what we put in there. All right, seller in possession, new form, okay? We do seller in possession all the time. What do we write it for? 29 days, right? Seller stay in for 29 days for free, okay? And then they don't get out on day 29. We have no wiggle room, okay? Remember that in the state of California, the way they define tenancy is when you have dwelled there for more than 30 days. So day 29, they go, okay, I can't get out for 2 more days. Okay, they've established tenancy under California law. Okay, that is an argument that can be made. So one of the big things that this says, there are a whole bunch, this is 2 pages, and these are all the things you should talk to your buyer about and your seller about if in fact they're going to remain in possession. But one of the biggest takeaways on this is do not write it for 29 days. Give yourself some wiggle room. Do it for 21. That means you have a whole 9 days to get those bad boys out of there if they're not on their way, okay? You want to make sure you have some wiggle room. But anyway, it talks about establishing tenancy under California law. It talks about damage, who would be responsible for it, maintenance of the property, okay? What happens if the seller remains longer than agreed? Consideration and legal restrictions. Okay, one of the big things with this is for longest time we used to say, seller can stay for free, but I want to take a deposit of $2,000. Okay, well under California law, you cannot take $2,000 deposit if the rent is 0, right? Because you can't take more than the rent. Yeah. So that's why we changed that whole form to call it a delivery of possession fee. To anyone that's a deposit, okay? But with that being said, that's what this explanation is. You can't call it a deposit and say that you want to keep it because there are laws. Okay, negotiating the terms of seller in possession. Here are all the different things that you can look at. Timing issues, 29 days or less. What if it rolls into 30 and what happens? Well, now you've established tenancy. Okay, you do need to have a lease. Okay, and then seller's early departure. This also comes up. Seller says, I'm staying for 10 days and I will pay $100 a day. Great. Then they close escrow. Seller says, I'm out in 3. I want my $700 back. Okay, and this says pound sand. Nope, we have an agreement for 10 days. We got your brand. Okay. The other thing we want to talk about, lender issues. Okay, seller remains in possession. Most lenders are going to require that if it is an owner-occupied loan, that buyer move in within 59 days. Some are less than that. So you always want to make sure before you make this agreement that you understand the terms of the loan. Okay, and then final verification of property condition. That is a long paragraph. Basically what it says, do not waive your VP. Okay, this is incredibly important. If you are going to try to charge for damage that's done after close of escrow, you need to know what the property looked like before close of escrow. Okay, do your VP, take pictures. Because this is an important dynamic in California right now with trying to retain any kind of monetary damages. Okay, so that goes through blah, blah, blah. Insurance and liability. One of the things that we need to know is, remember, insurance policies have a lot of exclusions right now. Okay, what happens when you get your homeowner's insurance bill? You just go, woohoo, they didn't cancel me, right? And you pay that bad boy right away. We don't read that they have added the following 17 pages of exclusions. Tons of exclusions these days, okay? So one of the exclusions that they typically will do when they're writing a new buyer policy is that they will state, because it's going to be owner occupied, that you're only covered when you dwell in that property, okay? Well, that's fine once the buyer moves in. But what happens for those 3 weeks when the seller's there? So you want to make sure you tell your buyer, please contact your homeowner's insurance and let them know that the seller will be in possession for 3 weeks. Because they'll usually remove that item, okay? And then they're fine, they're covered. But otherwise, it would be in there. Like in the old days when they had a prepayment penalty on the loan, and we said, we want you to remove it, and boom, it was gone. But otherwise, it was just boilerplate language. So it's the same type of thing. And then last but not least, termination of agency. This is my favorite paragraph as a broker. This says, look, agents, we're going to arrange this stuff, but we will not perform property management. As soon as this deal closes, our agency with you has terminated. So if buyer and seller have an issue, okay, don't call me. I'm done. I did my job. You agreed to this. You two work it out amongst yourselves. Now, does that ever happen? No, we always get involved. Okay, but I pointed out, because this is an important thing to point out to your agents if you're a broker, look what it says. Don't perform any task that could be deemed property management, because you will get hit. You're not allowed to do it. All right, tenant-occupied property addendum. We are close, 15 minutes. All right. I point this out because the change that was made to it is we are keep changing the title until everybody can figure out when we use this. So now it is the TOPA with RPA when selling tenant-occupied properties, or with RIPA when requesting occupied units be vacant. That's when we're going to use it, okay? Then we look at, oh, I didn't cut out the best part. Best part is right underneath this one sentence that says a tenant for our purposes is defined as somebody that is over the age of 18, that has dwelled in the property for 30 days or more, that is not on title, okay? Because remember, the agreement between the buyer and the seller, okay, as the seller, I agree to get out. But if I've got 4 kids that I haven't been able to get out of my house, in 20 years, I can't control them, obviously, right? So I agree to this, but I need to list all 4 of those kids, because if one of them goes crazy and won't get out of the house, I need to make sure that my liability is limited. That's what the TOPA does. And what's funny is sellers don't want to sign it, because they're like, well, that's my 18-year-old boyfriend. He's not a tenant. Okay, but if he goes rogue, you could be liable. So, but he won't go rogue. Okay, well then that's great. This doesn't mean anything, right? Because what this says is that, look, okay, we're going to check the box that says property to be delivered vacant. If seller does everything that seller is required to do to make sure that this person leaves with them, okay, hopefully, and that tenant doesn't leave, then the buyer's only recourse is to cancel the transaction and ask for their inspection money back. So your inspection, maybe your appraisal, okay? That's it. And they will be waiving, buyer will be waiving any claim for any other damages. This all came about during COVID because we had so many tenants that went, I don't have to go anywhere, right? And so those buyers were being damaged. They would sue the seller for damages. Seller couldn't do anything. They couldn't get this tenant out. So this is the protection policy. Again, you go through a 5-bedroom home and I am the only one on title. And there are beds in every room, and you see humans dwelling in there, and they do not look like they're two, okay? That is when you need a TOPA, okay? And the seller lists who's there. All right, cancellation for, okay, the only thing that we added to this, the COBR, it used to be cancellation of buyer representation. We now made it so that the tenant representation can be used. This is used for tenant representation as well. How many of you have used the tenant representation agreement? Yeah, okay. All right, FHA, VA, a mandatory clause. This is so when I submit an offer and it's VA, I have the amendatory clause. The amendatory clause says that if the appraisal does not come in at the price that I just wrote on this offer, let's say I wrote $500,000, then my borrower would have the ability to cancel the agreement and get their deposit back. Okay, well, we go back and forth, and now the price is $550. Okay, my mandatory clause said $500. So what this says is we can check the box and says due to a modification in the price stated in a previous mandatory clause, this FHA VA mandatory clause reflects the current purchase price. So what was happening is you really needed to update the form, but you had this old form and we had nothing to say delete the old one, add this one. That's what this new box does, okay? All right, modification of terms, listing agreement. This was a dumb thing, okay? 12 months from the date of modification. What this means basically is when we're looking at a listing, you can't list for more than a year. Let's say that I'm coming up on my year, or at 6 months, I say, let's take this out for another year, okay? Because I can do it a year at a time. Then it's from the date of the modification. So I can't get 6 months in advance. So if I said, let's extend this for 1 more year at the 6-month mark, then the expiration would be 1 year and 6 months, not, okay, 1 year plus 1 year. Which I didn't really know that was happening, but there we go. Okay, the rest of these are things that you're not really going to see all that often. Let me see. Property images or photographs agreement. That's the change. We added the word or photographs because apparently property image does not mean photographs. Can't make this up. Notice of private transfer fee. We now have this big, huge form that says, here's the private transfer fee, this is what it means, blah, blah, blah. It's by law, we have to tell a buyer about it. Well, guess what? We've done this for years, and it was with the NHD, okay? So I don't know why we had to create our own form, but if you get bored, we have one now, okay? Confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement. This actually is called a new form because we've named it the NDA because that's what it's referred to in the legal world, right? We actually had it before, it was the CDA. Nobody uses it because very rarely does anyone say, I want this all to be confidential. But every once in a while, it does come around, so it was something that was reviewed, and I think somebody thought it would be really fun to rename it the NDA. So, it is there. Additional signature addendum. What I'll tell you with this is it doesn't happen very often. I have 2 buyers, okay? I have John and Sally. These are my buyers. We go through and we go, oh, wait, they don't qualify for this purchase price. Okay, we need Dad, okay? Dad needs to be on the contract with us for us to write this purchase contract and qualify for the loan. Okay, well, where do I put Dad's signatures? Okay, we've always had this form called the ASA. And the way the form worked is that you had to do an ASA for every contractual document in every disclosure. That's a lot of ASAs, right? Okay, so most of us, we would bundle. We'd check the other box and we'd list a whole bunch of forms and go, yeah, I think that works. But they did that for us now, okay? So what they have now is the pre-printed bundles. So if I'm putting Dad on this, he's signing the ASA, then I could say, forms being signed. His signature on this document means he is signing, and I put that first box, purchase. He's signing the residential purchase agreement, the agency, fair housing, buyers, homeowners, so the whole package, okay? Liquidated damages and arbitration, additional signature addendum attached. So if the two, I can't remember, did I know Bob and Sally? If Bob and Sally signed arbitration and liquidated damages, then that means I need Dad to sign them too, and that's in a separate addendum that I'll show you in a minute. Okay, now let's say Dad is on title and we have to sell this, so he's the additional signer. Then I could use the listing bundle instead of trying to list all of those forms. Then we get down to the ever popular other. Okay, so any other, maybe you have your company ABA, your general disclosure, anything like that, you could list those, bundle a whole bunch of them on there and have one signature that indicates signature on all of those. The idea is we do not sign in margins, okay? So with that, you can add your additional signers, however many there are, and what their role is. Okay. Now, because liquidated damages is an additional, as in separate initial in our RPA, and our arbitration is as well, they created that addendum. This is only used if we have the additional signer. So this is only for Dad. Okay. If we don't have Dad and it's just Bob and Sally, we aren't using this because it's already covered in our RPA. Okay. It's only if we had to add Dad, we have 3 people on the agreement. So it basically goes over everything that's in the RPA and we get separate initials. Couple changes here. This is the ESP. I added it just for all of you so you knew what the ESP form was. Estimated seller proceeds. Okay, if your agents are having trouble getting their head around the new way that we operate and helping a seller see things as what is your purchase price, what is your net. Don't get lost in the minutia in between. This is an amazing form for you to really go, there are a lot of costs involved. But what are the big ones? What are your estimated net proceeds? Where do you want to be? Don't worry about what the numbers are in between. As long as we get what you want to net, then you're there. All right. All right, so you guys will get the slides, so you'll see some of those other ones that aren't used all that often, but I did want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So, questions? Oh, right here.
So, with regards to the buyer representation agreement, and if that buyer submits an offer and the amount is higher on the offer than what it is on the buyer representation, can they retroactively do a modification of terms to the buyer representation to make them equal?
I would not recommend it, because what you just did is a way to circumvent the NAR settlement agreement. That would be, if I were Catchmark, I'd be like, all right, what's your name? Let's go back to court. Okay, so, and again, you want to talk to your broker. So I will tell you what my policy is in my brokerage, is that we can amend down, but we do not amend up. I never want there to be a question that I circumvented the lawsuit.
The BRBC is a 90-day, did I get that right?
3 months. 3 months, right?
3 month max. So at the conclusion of 3 months, can one day elapse and you redo another 3 months?
Absolutely. Or
Can
you
do 3 months right then and there?
yes, you can extend for up to 3 months at a time. Okay? So you could use the same agreement and then do a modification of terms, MTBR, and say new expiration date is another 3 months. Okay? So you can you can only extend in writing. You can't have automatic extensions. This is the way the law reads in AB 2992. So you can do extensions, but they must be in writing, and they can only be for 3 months at a time. Mm-hmm.
Going along with that, if you have a representation agreement and your escrow is expired, you need to do an extension to complete the escrow?
No, the way that the BRBC and both of our buyer rep agreements, the way that it reads is that you must be under contract before the expiration date. Okay, so if they've written the offer on, let's say that we went 3 months and they write the offer on day 88, that's okay. We're under contract. There is no reason to extend anything. You are covered. Let's say they write it on day 92. Bummer for you. You don't get any money unless you have extended it. Okay?
I am the referring agent. I'm sending you my client.
Mhm.
Who should be filling out the RFA? You or me?
Either one. Either one. We're cooperating. Either one of you can fill it out. At the end of the day, okay, the person that's going to get the money, we need your W-9. So, and you're going to have to fill in your tax ID number. So one of the things that I'll tell you is that most people will fill out the terms and then they send it to your broker for the signature of on the agreement and the tax ID number, because none of the agents know our tax ID number.
Is there a time limit for that, or
Sending it back and forth?
for the referral? Is there a time limit? I know the new form it has it.
Oh, you mean for expiration?
Yeah.
No, not expiration of the agreement itself. It says expiration of the term. So if you referred somebody to me, this is a buyer and they're going to buy, then I get that referral for 12 months. After 12 months, the referral fee agreement goes away. That's the default in our agreement. But me signing it, I don't have that 3-day expiration that we see in our RPA or anything like that. You just want to get it signed. Usually, whoever is referring won't give phone numbers until they get it signed. I'm going to refer you a buyer, but you have no way to contact them until you sign my agreement. Say with love. All right, guys. Thank you all.